Hello, I'm Bob Vroon, and I am a retired pastor, a member of the church, neighborhood church. And today I'm going to talk to you about Romans 15, verses 22 to 29. I'll start out by reading verses 22 to 24. This is why I have often been hindered from coming to you. But now that there is no more place for me to work in these regions, and since I have been longing for many years to see you, I plan to do so when I go to Spain. I hope to visit you while passing through and to have you assist me on my journey there, as I have enjoyed your company for a while. In verses 22 to 24, Paul desires to preach the gospel, he has told us in the preceding verses, where it has not been preached before. Paul is a pioneer missionary. He wants to go to Spain because Spain was at the western end of the empire and had a flourishing culture and was becoming influential in the Roman world. What a great place to preach the gospel, right? And on his way to Spain, he's going to stop by and visit the people in Rome, the Roman church. Now in verses 25 to 27, this is something he needs to do first, he tells us. Now, however, I am on my way to Jerusalem and to service the saints there. For Macedonia and Achaia were pleased to make a contribution for the poor among the saints in Jerusalem. They were pleased to do it, and indeed owe it to them. For if the Gentiles have shared in the Jews' spiritual blessings, they owe it to the Jews to share with them their material blessings. Before he could do any of these things he had just spoken of, he has an important ministry to take care of, some business to wrap up. He had taken up an offering among the Gentile churches, the Greek churches, in Greece and in what is now called Turkey. That offering was for the poor among the church in Jerusalem. Now, why would these Gentiles want to help them? Well, number one, there was some real poverty among the Jewish believers in Jerusalem. Perhaps this was a result of the persecution by the religious leaders of the Jews. And remember, that persecution was started by none other than Paul himself before he was converted. Now, the second reason that they would want to help is it was an act of grace and of love. Paul tells us about this in 2 Corinthians 8, verses 6 to 9, which I'm not going to read at this time, but you can look that up if you wish. And he says to them, this is an act of grace. Complete this act of grace. And that's the way he describes it over and over again in that passage, an act of grace. And then you think about another passage, John 13, 34 and 35, where Jesus tells us that we are to love one another within the church, and that will show the world that we are his disciples. So it is an act of grace, and it is an act of love. But it was also an act of reconciliation. Remember that there was division. Well, let's face it, even hatred sometimes between Jews and Greeks in the Roman Empire. The Greeks felt culturally superior, and they referred to the Jews as barbarians, and that was intended to be an insult. The Jews felt morally superior and scorned these pagan Greeks for their immoral lifestyle and referred to them as dogs. I guess the equivalent might be today if we would talk about some people and say they live like animals. Even within the church, there were differences between Jews and Gentiles. There were Jews who were frankly uncomfortable with Gentiles coming into the church. Some insisted that they had to be circumcised. They had to become Jews, in effect. And they had to agree to live by the kosher laws. the Jewish laws. But even then, they were a little skeptical about these people being brought into the church and a little worried. You bring them in and they come in with a filthy lifestyle and they'll pollute the church. But now here are the Gentile churches sending them an offering to help them in their time of need. Perhaps that would win them over. Paul saw this offering as a means of strengthening fellowship between the Jewish believers in Jerusalem and his Gentile churches. It was also an act of obedience because both the Old Testament and the teachings of Jesus call upon us to help the poor. In Proverbs 14:31, it even talks about this is an act of worship, in effect. When you help the poor, this is an act of worship. It's a way of worshiping God. So there, and then in the teachings of Jesus, over and over again, you hear him saying that we are to help the poor, to reach out to them, to love them. So helping the poor was very Jewish and also very Christ-like, both. Now in verses 28 and 29, let's return to the thing about what Paul's plans are. So after I have completed this task and have made sure that they have received this fruit, I will go to Spain and visit you on the way. I know that when I come to you, I will come in the full measure of the blessing of Christ. So Paul plans to go to Rome on his way to Spain. And Paul did indeed go to Rome at some time later, but the sad thing is he came as a prisoner. In Acts 22 through 28, we see the story of what happened to Paul. He was arrested in Jerusalem and was ultimately sent to Rome to stand trial for his life. All this for the preaching of the gospel and for the riots that happened because he preached the gospel. And it was always, of course, the people who were against him preaching the gospel that started the riots. They were the troublemakers. But here he was on trial for his life because he was seen as a troublemaker because he preached the gospel. And, you know, in the book of Acts ends kind of funny. It talks about Paul in Rome and how he lived there and was allowed to live in his own place, but with a Roman soldier guarding him until he had his trial. And he was able to bring people to Christ there. He preached the gospel. It was wonderful, but all of a sudden it just cuts off. And you say to yourself, so what happened to him? Early church tradition says what happened to him is that he was sentenced to death and he was beheaded in Rome. That's what the tradition says. So Paul did this thing, this great thing of preaching the gospel all throughout the world, and he paid for it with his life. And so you think, well, why does it stop here, though? Why does Acts stop there? Well, it stopped there because this was the end of the apostles preaching the gospel, perhaps. But it wasn't the end of the gospel being preached. It's still being preached all over the earth in our world today. And you and I, in our own lives, can be sharing the gospel with people as well. Acts 29, you might say.